3 royal sisters, 1 human consort, and a galaxy at the edge of war. Jace Calder never asked for this fight, but when a powerful Nova essence ties his fate to the rulers of Zyra, he's forced to choose: accept the dark power of the past or face the destruction of everything he's come to care about. With 3 deadly, fierce women, Zara, Kalia, and Lisa, at his side, Jace steps into a battle unlike any other. But the shadows of his past are closing in, and the betrayal of a long-forgotten prince is about to ignite a war that will shatter their lives forever. Want to see how Jace Calder and the 3 royal sisters take on their most dangerous enemy yet? Hit that subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single pulse-pounding moment. Get ready for epic battles, political intrigue, and a love that could save or destroy them all. The underground arena on Zyra reeked of scorched metal and the sour tang of sweat. Flickering plasma lamps cast jagged pools of light across the roaring crowd, their hands waving credit chits like the blood about to spill on the cracked stone floor was some grand prize worth betting on. Jace Calder leaned against a shadowed wall, his tattered coat draped over broad shoulders, gray eyes scanning the chaos with the cold detachment of a man who'd seen too much. Strapped to his back, the long, black blade Zephyr rested silently, though its voice was anything but quiet in his mind. Stars above, Jace, this is dull. Zephyr whined, its tone a petulant growl echoing inside his skull. Let's fight something, or at least find a pretty face to warm up that icy heart of yours. Standing here like a statue is killing me. Shut it, Jace muttered under his breath, the corner of his mouth twitching into a faint, reluctant smirk. He'd grown used to the ancient sword's chatter, a relic from a civilization long erased from the galaxy's memory. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a companion, a sarcastic, relentless one that never knew when to quit. A fresh wave of cheers yanked his attention back to the arena. In the center, a female fighter stood poised, twin short blades glinting in her hands, her lithe form coiled with lethal grace beneath a tight black combat suit. Her skin shimmered a deep jade green, catching the light like polished stone, and her hair, a wild cascade of crimson, flared with every twist of her body. Golden eyes burned with a mix of pride and danger, locked on her opponent. A hulking cyborg, its mechanical arm whirring as it charged her like a runaway freighter. She's a sight, Zephyr purred in Jace's head, a low whistle threading through its words. Look at that movement, fluid as a river, sharp as a blade. 50 credits, says she takes him down. Jace didn't reply, but he couldn't argue. She was more than just striking. She was a force. In 3 heartbeats, she ducked under the cyborg's swinging fist, slipped behind it with a dancer's ease, and drove her blades into the neural wiring at its neck. The machine crumpled, a heap of sparking scrap, smoke curling from the severed circuits. The crowd erupted, but Jace's sharp eyes caught something else. A squad of figures in black armor, the glowing white logo of Novacore emblazoned on their chests, pushing through the rear entrance. Trouble's brewing, he murmured, his hand brushing the hilt of Zephyr. The woman noticed too. She flung her blades to the ground with a clatter, her gaze darting across the crowd, searching for an exit. But before she could bolt, 4 of the armored figures closed in, energy rifles humming to life in their grips. The audience began to scatter, panic rippling through the stands, but Jace stayed rooted, watching. Don't tell me you're just going to let her die out there, Zephyr snapped, its voice edged with impatience. Get in there, you soft-hearted bastard. Save her. I don't do charity. Jace shot back, though his eyes never left her. She was cornered now, one hand clutching a bleeding gash on her side, dark teal blood seeping through her fingers. Yet those golden eyes still blazed defiance. One of the mercenaries raised his rifle, and in that split second, Jace moved. He surged through the fleeing crowd like a phantom, Zephyr sliding free of its sheath with a whisper of steel. The blade arced through the air, not with brute force, but with surgical precision. For flashes of light split the dimness, and 4 helmeted heads thudded to the floor before a single shot could ring out. Teal blood sprayed across the stone, the crowd screams peaking into a frenzied roar as they fled. Jace straightened, sheathing Zether with a flick of his wrist, his expression as calm as if he'd just stepped out of a shower. The woman stared at him, chest heaving, her combat suit clinging tighter with every ragged breath. She stepped forward, closer than he expected, and in a moment of unsteady balance, her hand pressed against his chest. The heat of her jade skin burned through his shirt, sending a jolt through him that he wasn't prepared for. "Who are you?" Her voice was low, rough, carrying the weight of someone used to giving orders. "Jace called her," he replied, forcing his tone to stay even despite the way her touch lingered. "The guy who just kept you breathing." She smiled, a sharp, knowing curve of her lips that was equal parts gratitude and something darker. "I'm Zara, Princess of Zyra. Nova Corps wants me dead to claim this planet. I need your protection." Jace arched a brow, leaning back slightly to break the contact, though the warmth of her hand still ghosted over his skin. "I don't come cheap. Unless you're marrying me, I don't take jobs like this." It was a throwaway line, a jab to deflect her intensity, but Zara didn't laugh. She stepped closer, her chest brushing his just enough to make his pulse kick up a notch, those golden eyes pinning him in place. "Done," she said, firm as a vow. "What?" Jace blinked, genuine surprise cracking his cool facade for the first time that night. "Brilliant," Zether crowed in his mind, its glee practically vibrating through his skull. "1 minute, I'm thinking you'll die alone in some backwater dive, and now you've got a wife. And she's a stunner." Jace took a step back, dragging a hand through his dark hair as he tried to regain his footing. "You're serious?" Zara nodded, her hand grazing his arm as she steadied herself, fingers tracing the hard line of his bicep for a fleeting second that made his jaw tighten. "In my way, yes. Come with me," Jace called her. "I'll explain everything." He studied her, the chaos of the arena fading into a dull hum around them. She was trouble, beautiful, deadly trouble, and he just walked straight into it. But beneath the cynicism he wore like armor, something stirred, a flicker of curiosity, or maybe something more dangerous. He didn't know her game yet, but he was damn sure he'd find out. The air outside the arena was thick with the ozone tang of Zyra's twin moons, their pale light cutting through the haze of the industrial sprawl. Jace followed Zara through a maze of narrow alleys, her pace brisk despite the wound in her side. Her combat suit hugged every curve, the fabric torn just enough to reveal a glimpse of teal skin beneath, and he caught himself staring longer than he meant to. Zether, of course, didn't let it slide. "Eyes up, soldier," the sword teased. "Or are you already planning the honeymoon?" "Shut up," Jace growled under his breath, focusing on the path ahead. Zara glanced back, catching his muttered words, and raised a crimson brow. "Talking to yourself?" she asked, her tone laced with amusement. "Something like that," he replied, keeping his face neutral. "Where are we going?" "My ship's docked in the lower district," she said, turning a corner with a fluid grace that belied her injury. "Nova Corps' been hunting me since I escaped their ambush at the palace. They want Zyra's Nova crystals, biggest deposit in this sector. Without me and my sisters, they'll take it all." "Sisters?" Jace echoed, a sinking feeling creeping into his gut. She smirked over her shoulder, a flash of white teeth against her jade skin. "You'll meet them soon enough. Assuming you're still in, husband-to-be." "Don't call me that," he said, though the words lacked bite. Her casual confidence was disarming, and the way she moved, hips swaying just enough to draw his eye, didn't help. He shook his head, forcing his focus back to the mission. "What's the deal with Nova Corps?" "Corporate greed with military muscle," she replied, her voice hardening. "They've been chipping away at Zyra for years, bribes, sabotage, assassinations. My mother's dying, and they see us as weak. 3 princesses, no king to legitimize us in the eyes of the Interstellar Assembly. They're wrong." Jace snorted. "Sounds like a problem for politicians, not a blade like me." "You're more than a blade," she said, stopping abruptly and turning to face him. She was close again, too close, her breath warm against his cheek as she studied him. "I saw what you did back there. That wasn't just skill. That was something else." Her hand brushed his chest again, this time deliberate, fingers splaying over the fabric as if testing his reaction. His breath hitched, and for a moment, the alley shrank to just the two of them. The heat of her touch, the faint scent of her, like spice and steel mingled together. Then she pulled back, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Careful," Jace said, voice low. "Keep that up, and I might think you mean it." "Oh, I do," she murmured, turning away with a sway that was pure provocation. "But we've got bigger fights ahead. Come on." Zether chuckled in his mind. "She's got you wrapped around her finger already. I like her." Jace ignored the sword, falling in a step behind her. The lower district loomed ahead, a tangle of rusted platforms and flickering neon signs. A small, sleek ship waited at the edge of a docking bay, its hull shimmering faintly under the moon's glow. Zara punched a code into the hatch, and it slid open with a hiss. "Get in," she said, gesturing inside. "We're not safe yet." He hesitated, glancing at her. "You still haven't told me what I'm signing up for." She leaned against the hatch frame, crossing her arms in a way that pulled her suit tighter across her chest. "Protection. Power. Maybe more, if you play your cards right. Nova Corps is coming from my family, and you're the edge we need. In return, you get placed with us, credits, resources, whatever you want." "And the marriage bit?" He pressed, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her. Her lips curved, a challenge at her gaze. "Call a bonus. Or a necessity. You'll see." Before he could respond, a distant rumble shook the platform. Hovercraft engines, closing fast. Zara's expression darkened. "They've tracked us. Inside now." Jace didn't argue. He ducked into the ship, Zether humming faintly against his back as the hatch sealed behind them. The interior was cramped but high-tech, panels glowing with Zyran runes he couldn't read. Zara slid into the pilot's seat, her fingers flying over the controls, and the ship lurched upward just as energy blasts scorched the platform below. "Hold on," she snapped, banking hard to evade the pursuing craft. Jace braced himself against the wall, watching her work. Her focus was absolute, but the way her body moved, tense, fluid, alive, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. "Nice view," Zether quipped, and for once Jace didn't tell it to shut up. The ship shuddered as Zara pulled it into a tight spiral, dodging a volley of energy blasts that lit up the cockpit in flashes of searing white. Jace gripped the wall, his boots sliding slightly on the polished floor, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. The way her hands danced over the controls, quick, sure, almost sensual in their precision, held his attention more than the chaos outside. Her crimson hair whipped across her face as she jerked the yoke, and when she glanced back at him, those golden eyes caught his with a spark that wasn't just adrenaline. "Enjoying the show?" she asked, her voice cutting through the rumble of the engines, a teasing edge to it that made his jaw tighten. "Could use better seats," he shot back, forcing a casual tone despite the heat creeping up his neck. Zether snickered in his mind, a low, rolling laugh that he couldn't ignore. "Oh, she's good," the sword said, quick with her hands and her tongue. "You're in deep, my friend." Jace didn't bother responding. The ship leveled out, the pursuing craft falling behind as Zara punched the engines into overdrive. The hum of the thrusters settled into a steady drone, and she leaned back in her seat, exhaling sharply. Her combat suit stretched taut across her chest with the movement, and Jace caught himself staring again, long enough that she noticed. "Eyes on the mission, Calder," she said, smirking as she swiveled to face him. "Or do humans always get distracted this easily?" "Only when the view's worth it," he replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. Her smirk widened, and for a moment the cockpit felt smaller, the air thicker. Then she stood, brushing past him to check a rear panel. Her shoulder grazed his chest, deliberate or not, and the faint heat of her jade skin lingered like a brand. "We're clear for now," she said, her voice dropping lower as she leaned over the controls, giving him an eyeful of her silhouette. "Next stop, the palace. You'll want to brace yourself. My sisters aren't as restrained as I am." "Sisters," Jace muttered, the words sinking in. How many? 2, she said, turning to him with a look that was half amusement, half challenge. Kalia and Lisa. And before you ask, yes, they're part of the deal. Deal? He crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. I didn't sign up for a harem. You did when you said yes to me, Zara replied, stepping closer until she was just a breath away. Her fingers brushed his arm, light but intentional, tracing the edge of his sleeve. It's Zyron law, Kuyet thong. Marry one royal daughter, you marry all eligible ones. Keeps the bloodline united against threats like Novacor. Lucky you, huh? Lucky! Jace echoed, his voice dry. Sounds like a trap. Think of it as a bonus, she murmured, her hand lingering on his arm, her touch sending a ripple of heat through him. 3 of us, 1 of you. Most men would kill for the chance. Most men don't have me, Zether chimed in gleefully. 3 princesses? This is the best day of my very long life. Jace shot a mental glare at the sword, but before he could retort, the ship jolted as it docked. Zara pulled back, her expression shifting to businesslike focus. We're here. Follow me, and try not to faint when you meet them. The palace of Zyra rose from the planet's surface like a jagged crown, its spires carved from translucent obsidian that shimmered under the twin moons. The air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of alien flora, sweet and metallic like Zara herself. Jace trailed her through towering corridors lined with glowing runes, his boots echoing on the crystalline floor. Zether hummed faintly against his back, a low vibration of excitement. Magnificent, the sword remarked. Haven't been in a place this fancy since that little incident with the Zarathian Emperor. Ended with a duel and a lot of blood, but I'm sure this'll go smoother. Don't jinx it, Jace thought back, his eyes scanning the shadows for threats. Zara led him to a massive chamber, its ceiling open to the sky, stars glinting through a lattice of black stone. 2 figures waited there, and as they stepped into the light, Jace felt the air shift, charged electric. The first was a warrior, no question. Kalia stood nearly as tall as Jace, her frame packed with muscle under a bronze combat suit studded with metal plates. Her hair was a wild mane of gold, cropped short and untamed, and her amber eyes burned with a ferocity that could have melted steel. A heavy curved blade hung at her hip, its edge glowing faintly with energy. She sized him up like a predator circling prey, her lips curling into a half-snarl. The second was her opposite. Lisa glided forward, her long black hair cascading in waves down her back, framing a face that was all sharp angles and dangerous allure. Her gown, some shimmering fabric that clung to her curves, shifted with every step, revealing glimpses of teal skin that matched Zara's. Her violet eyes locked on Jace, and he felt a strange pull, a whisper of heat curling through his mind. Zara, Kalia barked, her voice booming across the chamber. Where the hell have you been? The palace has been a war zone since you vanished from that fight pit. And who's this? Lisa purred, her tone silk smooth as she drifted closer to Jace. She stopped just short of touching him, her gaze raking over him with unabashed interest. A human. How intriguing. Zara raised a hand, cutting through the tension. Kalia, Lisa, meet Jace Calder. My new husband. The silence that followed was deafening. Then both sisters spoke at once. You're what? Kalia sputtered, her hand twitching toward her blade. Deliciously scandalous, Lisa said, her lips curving into a smile that made Jace's pulse kick up despite himself. He saved my life, Zara explained, her tone calm but firm. Novacor ambushed me at the arena. He took them out, 4 of them, in seconds. He's ours now. Ours, Jace repeated, his voice low and edged with suspicion. Kalia stepped forward, closing the distance until she loomed over him. You married her without asking us? Without a fight to prove yourself? She jabbed a finger into his chest, hard enough to make him tense, but her touch lingered, her calloused hand brushing against him in a way that wasn't entirely hostile. Let's see if you're worth it, human. Before he could respond, she lunged, grabbing his arm and twisting him into a grapple. Jace reacted on instinct, spinning out of her grip and catching her wrist. They stumbled, bodies crashing together. Her muscle against his, her breath hot against his neck as she pressed him back. The contact was rough, raw, and far too close, her curves grinding against him for a fleeting second before he broke free. "Strong," Kalia grunted, stepping back with a grin that was half approval, half challenge. "Maybe you'll do." "Enough, Kalia," Zara snapped, though her eyes flickered with amusement. "He's not here to wrestle you yet." Lisa laughed, a sound like glass chimes, and glided to Jace's side. "Oh, I like him already." She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek, light as a feather but heavy with intent. A sudden wave of heat flooded through him, desire, sharp and unbidden, curling low in his gut. Her violet eyes gleamed. "I can feel your mind, human. So disciplined, but not unbreakable." "Stop that," Jay said, his voice rough as he pulled away, though the sensation lingered, tugging at his control. "She's a Psy-Weaver," Zara said, crossing her arms. "Kalia's the muscle, Lisa's the mind, and I'm the one who gets things done. Together, we're Zyra's shield. Except Nova Corps wants us dead. And the marriage?" Jace asked, his patience thinning. "What's the catch?" Kalia smirked, leaning against a pillar. "Kiyet Thong, old law. You take one of us, you take all three. Keeps the royal line tight. No weak links for enemies to exploit." "All three," Jay said slowly, the weight of it sinking in. Lisa trailed a finger along his shoulder, her touch sending a shiver down his spine. "Is that so terrible? We each have unique talents." Her voice dropped, husky and suggestive, and Jace felt that pull again, stronger this time. Zether was practically howling with delight. "Three goddesses. I'm in love, Jace." "Say yes, you fool." Zara stepped between them, breaking the spell. "It's not a game," she said, her tone serious now. "Nova Corps' been after our Nova crystals for years. With Mother fading, they're pushing harder. Assassins, sabotage, the works. We need a champion. After what I saw in that arena, you're it." Jace rubbed his jaw, the memory of Zara's touch still burning in his mind, now layered with Kalia's raw strength and Lisa's dangerous allure. "And if I walk away?" "You won't," Lisa said, her smile knowing. "I can sense it. You're already hooked." "She's not wrong," Zether added smugly. "You've been drifting too long, Jace. This is purpose. Plus, you know, the perks." Before he could argue, a tremor shook the chamber. Red lights flared along the walls, and a synthetic voice blared through hidden speakers. "Perimeter breach detected. Hostile forces in sectors 3 and 7. Kalia drew her blade, the energy humming to life. "Nova Corps. They're inside." Lisa's eyes narrowed, her focus sharpening. "Dozens of them. Angry minds coming for us." Zara turned to Jace, pulling a slim energy pistol from a concealed panel. "Decision time," called her. "You with us?" Jace's hand settled on Zether's hilt, the familiar weight grounding him as the sword pulsed with eager anticipation. "I haven't said yes to anything yet," he said, drawing the blade with a smooth motion that made it sing through the air. "But I'll be damned if I let them kill you before I figure this out." Zara's grin was fierce, Kalia's approving, and Lisa's downright predatory. The chamber doors burst open, revealing a squad of Nova Corps soldiers in matte black armor, weapons raised. Jace stepped forward, Zether gleaming darkly in his grip, and for the first time in years, he felt something beyond survival. A flicker of something alive, dangerous, and undeniably tempting. The Nova Corps soldiers stormed into the chamber like a tide of black steel, their rifles spitting energy bolts that seared the air with a high-pitched whine. Jace didn't hesitate. Zether flashed in his hand, a blur of shadow and precision, intercepting the first barrage before it could reach the sisters. The blade didn't just deflect, it absorbed, each beam vanishing into its dark surface with a faint pulse of power. 3 soldiers lunged at him, their armor humming with shield generators, but Jace moved faster. Zether sang, a low, eerie note, and their helmets split apart, heads tumbling to the floor in unison. Show off, Zara called over the chaos, her pistol barking as she dropped two more with precise shots to their chest plates. Her stance was steady, but the tear in her combat suit gaped wider now, revealing a sliver of teal skin that glistened with sweat. Jace caught the sight mid-fight, and it hit him like a stray bolt, distracting, dangerous. Focus, lover boy. Zether snapped in his mind. Or do you want me to handle this alone? Jace gritted his teeth, pivoting to meet another attacker. Kalia charged in beside him, her energy blade slashing through a soldier's arm with a crackle of sparks. She was a whirlwind, brutal, unyielding, and when she spun to face him, their shoulders collided. Her body pressed against his for a split second, hard muscle and heat, her amber eyes locking with his in a fierce grin. Not bad. Human, she shouted, her voice rough with adrenaline. Her hand clapped his back, fingers digging into his shoulder with a grip that lingered just long enough to send a jolt through him. Keep up. Lisa, meanwhile, stood near the chamber's edge, her hands raised. Three soldiers froze mid-step, their rifles clattering to the ground as their eyes went blank. She turned to Jace, her violet gaze piercing through the fray, and a slow smile curved her lips. They're dreaming now, she said, her voice a velvet whisper that somehow carried over the din. Want to know what I can make you dream? Later, Jace grunted, ducking a wild shot that scorched the wall behind him. But her words slithered into his mind, stirring images he shoved down fast. The sisters fought like a unit. Zara's precision, Kalia's fury, Lisa's eerie calm, and Jace found himself slotting into their rhythm, Zether guiding his strikes with telepathic nudges. Left flank, 2 incoming, the sword warned. Jace extended his arm, letting Zether steer the blow. The blade sliced through the soldier's armor like paper, circuits sparking as they collapsed. He barely registered the kills. His focus split between the fight and the 3 women who dragged him into this mess. The last soldier fell with a gurgle, Kalia's blade buried in his chest. The chamber went quiet, save for the hiss of cooling metal and the sisters' ragged breathing. Jace wiped Zether clean with a flick of his wrist, the blade's surface gleaming darkly as he sheathed it. Zara holstered her pistol, stepping over a body to reach him. Her hair was a tangled mess now, clinging to her sweat-slicked neck, and when she stopped, she was close, too close again. You're good, she said, her golden eyes searching his face. Her hand brushed his chest, a casual touch that felt anything but better than good. Had practice, he replied, his voice steady despite the way her fingers lingered, tracing the edge of his coat. The air between them crackled, and he wondered, not for the first time, what he'd stumbled into. Kalia strode over, wiping blood from her blade. He's not just a pretty face, she said, her tone gruff but approving. She clapped his arm, her grip strong and warm, sliding down to his elbow before letting go. Might actually survive us. Lisa glided in last, her gown somehow pristine despite the carnage. She leaned in, her breath brushing his ear as she murmured, "Survive us? Oh, I think he'll do more than that." Her fingers grazed his neck, light and teasing, sending a shiver down his spine before she pulled away with a knowing smirk. Jace stepped back, needing space from the trio's overwhelming presence. You 3 always this handsy with strangers? Only the ones we like, Zara said, her smirk mirroring Lisa's. Come on, we need to move. Nova Corps won't stop with 1 squad. They relocated to a secure chamber deep within the palace, its walls pulsing with faint blue light from embedded crystals. A long table stood in the center, laden with food and drink, fruits that shimmered like glass, a decanter of dark liquid that smelled faintly of spice. Jay sat, Zether propped against his chair, while the sisters settled around him. The tension from the fight lingered, but it morphed into something else, something heavier, more charged. So, Jay said, breaking the silence. Huit Tong, et lai. Kalia leaned forward, her elbows on the table, muscles flexing under her suit. It's simple. Zyra's royal line stays strong by binding all eligible daughters to 1 consort. No favorites, no fractures. You marry Zara. You get me and Lisa too. Deal's done. Done. Jace raised a brow. I didn't sign anything. You did when you saved her, Lisa said, her voice smooth as she swirled a glass of the dark liquid. She took a sip, her lips glistening as she met his eyes. And when you followed her here, I can feel it in you, curiosity, hunger. You're not walking away. Her words hit too close, and Jace shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with how easily she saw through him. Zara watched him, her expression softer now, almost vulnerable. It's not just law, she said. It's survival. Nova Corps wants the Nova crystals, quantum grade, rarest in the galaxy. They've been after us since Mother fell ill. 3 princesses, no champion? We're prey. You changed that. Jace leaned back, crossing his arms. So, I'm a prop? A figurehead to wave at your enemies? No, Zara said, standing and circling to his side. She stopped behind him, her hands resting on his shoulders, fingers pressing lightly into the tense muscle there. You're a weapon, and after what I saw out there, maybe more. Her touch was firm, warm, sliding down his arms as she leaned in, her breath brushing his ear. What do you say? His pulse quickened, her closeness stirring something raw in him. Before he could answer, a memory crashed through his mind, sharp and unbidden. He was 12, a scrawny kid huddled in the wreckage of Erebus Station's lower decks. The air was thick with ash, his stomach a hollow ache after days without food. The station had been hit by raiders, supplies torched or stolen, and he'd been left behind, another orphan in a galaxy that didn't care. Footsteps echoed through the rubble, and he shrank back, expecting a scavenger or worse. Instead, a girl appeared, maybe 14, with jade skin and crimson hair tied back in a messy braid. Her golden eyes found him, wide and fierce, and she knelt, holding out a canteen. Drink, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. You look like death. He snatched it, gulping the water down, too desperate to question her. She watched him, then pulled a ration bar from her pack and pressed it into his hand. What's your name? Jace, he rasped, barely audible. I'm Zara, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Stay alive, Jace. Things get better. She vanished as quickly as she'd come, called away by distant shouts. He clutched the ration bar, her name echoing in his head as he ate, the first spark of hope he'd felt in months. Jace! Zara's voice pulled him back to the present. She was still behind him, her hands on his shoulders, concern flickering in her eyes. You okay? He blinked, the memory fading. Yeah, just remembering something. What? She asked, her fingers tightening slightly, grounding him. You gave me water once, he said abruptly. On Erebus Station, after a raid. I was starving. You didn't have to, but you did. Her eyes widened, recognition dawning. The kid in the rubble, she whispered. That was you. Well, isn't that poetic? Zether chimed in, its tone dripping with glee. Destiny, huh? Shut up, sword. You remember me? Jace asked, ignoring Zether. Zara nodded, her hands sliding off his shoulders as she stepped around to face him. Not many humans would have survived that hellhole. I saw something in you, still do. Kalia snorted, breaking the moment. Great. So he's your stray puppy-turned-husband. Doesn't change the fact we've got Nova Corps breathing down our necks. She's right, Lisa said, rising with a fluid grace that drew Jace's eye despite himself. They'll hit again, harder. We need you, Jace. All of us do. Zara extended a hand, her gaze steady. Come with me. There's something you need to see. Curiosity and something deeper pulled him to his feet. He followed her through a hidden passage, the sisters trailing behind, until they reached a chamber unlike any he'd seen. The walls glowed with living crystal, and in the center sat a pool of liquid that shimmered like molten silver. Nova essence, Zara called it. It's the heart of Zyra, she said, kneeling by the pool. Our ancestors found it, used it to see beyond time. Kalia channels it as strength, Lisa as will. For me, it's glimpses of what could be. She took his hand, her skin warm against his, and guided it to the surface. The world dissolved as their fingers touched the essence, a vision swallowing them whole. Zyra in ruins, the crystals stripped bare, the sisters' bodies impaled as warnings. Then a shift, Zyra thriving, the trio ruling with a shadowed figure at their side. The vision snapped off, leaving them breathless by the pool. "Now you see," Zara said, her voice trembling slightly, her hand still in his. "What's at stake?" Jace nodded, the weight of it settling on him. She leaned closer, her breath mingling with his, and for a moment, he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she pulled back, a half-smile playing on her lips. "Rest tonight," Jace called her. "Tomorrow, we decide what this really means." Kalia grinned, slinging an arm around his shoulders, her touch rough but warm. "Sleep tight, hero. You'll need it." Lisa brushed past him on her way out, her fingers trailing across his chest with a whisper of heat. "Dream of us," she said, and damn if he didn't want to. Alone with Zether, Jace stared into the pool, the sisters' presence lingering like a storm on the horizon, wild, unpredictable, and undeniably tempting. Jace lingered in the crystal chamber, the glow of the Nova Essence pool casting shifting shadows across his face. The vision lingered too, Zyra's ruin or redemption, the sisters' fates tied to his choice. He'd spent years drifting between stars, taking jobs that paid in blood and credits, never staying long enough to care. Now, here he was, tangled in royal politics, ancient laws, and 3 women who'd slipped under his skin faster than he could have imagined. "Getting soft, are we?" Zether's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and teasing. 3 days ago, you'd have laughed at this mess and walked away. Now you're staring into magic pools, dreaming of princesses. "Not dreaming," Jace muttered, though the lie felt thin. Zara's touch still burned on his hand. Kalia's strength echoed in his shoulders, and Lisa's whisper coiled in his mind. He shook his head, turning from the pool. "Just figuring out the play." "Sure you are," Zether said, its tone dripping with sarcasm. "Keep telling yourself that when you're tripping over their skirts, or peeling them off." "Shut up," Jace growled, but the sword's laughter echoed as he stalked out of the chamber. The palace corridors stretched endlessly before him, the air humming with the faint pulse of Zyra's crystal heart. Guest quarters waited at the end of a winding hall, a sleek room with a bed draped in shimmering fabric and a view of the moons through a curved window. He dropped onto the mattress, Zether propped against the wall, and let exhaustion pull him under. Sleep didn't come easy. Flashes of the vision mixed with older memories, Erebus Station's ash-choked ruins, Zara's young face offering him water, the years of scraping by with Zether as his only constant. And then, unbidden, came Lisa's voice, "Dream of us." His mind obeyed, conjuring images of jade skin, amber eyes, violet glances, hands brushing, bodies pressing close, a tangle of heat and danger he couldn't shake. He woke to a soft knock, his pulse racing, skin damp with sweat. Zara stood in the doorway, her combat suit swapped for a loose tunic that still hugged her curves in ways that didn't help his state. "Bad dreams?" she asked, stepping inside, her golden eyes catching the moonlight. "Something like that," he said, sitting up and dragging a hand through his hair. "What's wrong?" "Assemblies in 3 days," she replied, perching on the edge of the bed. Too close again. Her knee brushed his thigh, a casual contact that sent a spark through him. Nova Corps pushing their claim. Zyra's unstable without a male consort. Archaic nonsense, but it's law. "We need you ready." "Ready to what?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep and her proximity. "Stand there and look pretty." She smirked, leaning in until her breath grazed his jaw. "Stand there and look dangerous. Speak for us when they won't listen to women. You're not just a prop, Jace. You're proof we're not prey." Her hand rested on his arm, fingers tracing the muscle there, slow and deliberate. "After last night, I know you can handle it." His throat tightened, her touch stoking a fire he'd spent years burying. "And the all 3 part?" he asked, forcing his tone to stay even. "That's still on the table." "It's Zyra's way," she murmured, her fingers sliding up to his shoulder, her body shifting closer. "But it's your choice. Always has been." Her lips hovered near his, a challenge, and a promise. And for a heartbeat, he almost closed the gap. Footsteps broke the spell. Kalia burst in, her bronze suit gleaming, hair wild as ever. Up, human. Training starts now. Assembly's no picnic, and I'm not letting you embarrass us. She grabbed his wrist, yanking him off the bed with a strength that pressed her body against his for a fleeting, dizzying moment. Her grin was all teeth. Move it. Zara laughed, pulling back. She's right. Get dressed. We got work. 3 days blurred into a grind of preparation. Kalia drilled him in the palace's sparring hall, her blade clashing with Zither in brutal, sweaty bouts that left them both breathless. She fought close, too close, her muscle pinning him in holds that were as much test as tease, her hands gripping his arms, hips brushing his in the grapple. Not bad, she'd growl, her breath hot against his neck, leaving him more rattled than he'd admit. Lisa took a different tack, pulling him into strategy sessions where her psi-weaving brushed his mind, stirring heat and distraction. Focus, she'd purr, her fingers trailing his wrist as she handed him maps, her touch lingering with a smile that promised trouble. Or I'll make you. Zara coordinated it all, her presence a constant pull. Quiet commands, fleeting touches, a brush of her hand on his back as she passed. By the third night, Jace was a taut wire, the sisters' combined intensity fraying his control. Zither loved it, of course. Living the dream, it taunted. 3 princesses drooling over you. Don't screw this up. The interstellar assembly loomed like a monolith between Zyra's suns, a sprawling station of gleaming steel and arrogance. Their ship docked with a soft thud, and Jay stood at the viewport, watching it grow closer. Zara adjusted her silver and teal regalia beside him. Kalia flexed in crimson armor, and Lisa shimmered in a deep violet gown. They were a united front, stunning, lethal, and he felt the weight of their trust settle on him. Nervous? Zither asked, its tone unusually serious. Should I be? Jace thought back, adjusting his blackened silver coat, a match to Zara's colors, a deliberate signal. Last time we were here, we left in cuffs, Zither reminded him. That Clitherin diplomat incident. You punched him. He deserved it, Jace replied silently, stepping into the docking bay with the sisters. Assembly guards in white uniforms greeted them, their eyes widening as they registered Jace, a human among Zyra's royals. The Grand Chamber was a colossus of stone and light, its walls lined with galleries where delegates from countless worlds watched. The floors stretched wide, a petitioner's platform at its heart, surrounded by the Assembly's 25 arbiters, beings of scales, feathers, and chrome, representing the galaxy's power blocks. Across from them sat Novacor's delegation, led by a woman with cold, augmented eyes and a suit of polished black. The Assembly recognizes Zyra's representatives, intoned the lead arbiter, a serpentine figure with a voice like rustling leaves. You stand to contest Novacor's claim to your world's resources. Speak. Zara stepped forward, her presence commanding. Honorable Assembly, we assert our right to rule Zyra, unbroken for centuries. Novacor's accusations of instability are lies. They've engineered our crises to seize the Nova crystals. The Novacor exec rose, her voice clipped and mechanical. Pretty words, princess, but your exports have crashed since your mother's illness. 2 rebellions in a year. Your rule is weak. The Assembly requires stability. Rebellions they funded, Kalia snarled, her hand twitching toward her blade. Evidence, an arbiter asked, its metallic face impassive. Submitted and lost, conveniently, Lisa replied, her tone smooth but biting. The galleries murmured, scandal threading through the crowd. Another arbiter, a hulking figure with glowing eyes, leaned forward. Zyra's laws demand a male consort for legitimacy. You've refused this requirement, until now. We've chosen, Zara said, gesturing to Jace. Jace called her our consort by Hiet Thong, binding all 3 royal daughters. All eyes turned to him. The chamber hushed, the weight of scrutiny pressing down. Jace called her, the lead arbiter said slowly. The mercenary, known as the Erebus Ghost? A curious choice. Novacor's exec smirked. A hired thug, not a consort. This is a desperate ploy. I'm committed to Zyra, Jace said, stepping forward, his voice carrying a quiet menace. I've already stopped their assassins. Ask the bodies I left behind. Zara's hand found his, her fingers threading through his with a warmth that steadied him. He's ours, she said, her grip tightening, a silent claim that sent a ripple through him. The exec's eyes narrowed. Words. The assembly needs proof. Tradition demands it. They're stalling, Zether warned. Look, guards moving in the galleries. Jace clocked it. Novacor operatives, disguised in civilian cloaks, shifting into firing positions. The exec's security team fanned out, blocking exits. He squeezed Zara's hand, a signal, and she nodded imperceptibly. The lead arbiter raised a hand. We vote now on Novacor's claim. I object. Jace cut in, his voice slicing through the chamber. Not to the vote, to the assassination they're planning. Chaos erupted. Preposterous. The exec spat, but Jace pointed, precise calm, to the operatives. There, and there. Armed. Check them. No time, Zara whispered, her body tensing against his. The first shots came from above, energy bolts raining down. Jace drew Zether, the blade of vortex of shadow, absorbing the barrage. The sisters moved. Kalia roared into the fray, her blade carving through armor. Lisa froze a squad with a flick of her wrist. Zara fired from behind Jace, her shoulder pressed to his back. He shielded them, Zether a blur, until the blade pulsed with stolen energy. Enough, he roared, slamming Zether into the platform. A shockwave exploded outward, shattering Novacor weapons into dust, knocking operatives flat. The chamber fell silent, arbiters staring in awe. Jace straightened, Zether gleaming in his grip. Zyra is under my protection. Try again, and I won't hold back. The exec paled, her composure cracking. What are you? Their consort, Jace said simply. Legitimate. The lead arbiter spoke, voice steady. The assembly recognizes Jace Calder's commitment. Novacor's claim is denied. Guards swarmed, dragging the exec and her team away. The galleries buzzed, offers of alliance pouring in as Zyra's star rose. Jace stood with the sisters, their presence a wall at his back, and felt the shift. He wasn't just a drifter anymore. The return to Zyra was a blaze of celebration, the capital city alight with floating lanterns and cheers. In the palace's grand hall, the sisters' mother, frail but regal, blessed their union in a ceremony that felt surreal to Jace. He stood on a balcony afterward, the moons painting the sky, Zether a shadowy figure beside him in a rare manifestation. Well, you've done it, the sword said. Consort to 3 princesses. Not bad for a gutter rat. Didn't plan this, Jace replied, staring at the city below. Didn't you? Zether countered. I've been in your head, Jace. You've wanted a fight worth winning. Soft steps approached, and Zether faded as Zara joined him. She'd shed her regalia for a simple dress, her jade skin glowing in the moonlight. Second thoughts? She asked, leaning against the railing, her arm brushing his. Wondering how I got here, he admitted. From Erebus to this. She smiled, stepping closer until her body pressed lightly against his side, warm and solid. I saw something in you then. Still do. Her hand slid up his chest, resting over his heart, and this time he didn't pull away. Kalia and Lisa appeared, completing the circle. Staying, huh? Kalia asked, her hand landing on his shoulder with a firm squeeze that lingered. Always was, Lisa said, her fingers brushing his jaw, her touch a spark. I felt it. Jace looked at them. Zara's quiet strength, Kalia's fire, Lisa's mystery, and nodded. I am staying. Far off, on a barren moon, a figure watched a holoscreen flicker with Jace's face. Theron, teal-skinned, cybernetic eye glowing, traced the image, his voice a hiss. You took my sister's human. I'll take everything. Theron's words hung in the void, a promise etched in the cold glow of his cybernetic eye. He flicked off the holoscreen, the barren moon's silence swallowing the hum of his machinery. His teal skin, marred by scars and metal grafts, gleamed under the faint light of a dying star. Once a prince of Zyra, now a ghost of Novacor's making, he'd been cast out, betrayed, he believed, by the sisters who'd chosen tradition over him. Jace Calder's face burned in his mind, a human usurping his blood right. Theron's metal hand clenched, servos whining. Soon, he muttered, turning to a shadowed figure behind him. Ready the fleet. Back on Zyra, the celebration pulsed through the capital like a living thing. Lanterns drifted skyward, their light dancing off the obsidian spires, and the air thrummed with music, alien strings and deep, resonant drums. Jace stood on the balcony, the sisters' presence anchoring him as the city cheered below. Zara's hand lingered on his chest, Kalia's grip rested on his shoulder, and Lisa's fingers brushed his jaw, a trio of sensations that kept his blood humming despite the exhaustion of the day. "You're one of us now," Zara said, her voice soft but firm, her golden eyes searching his. Her fingers pressed harder, tracing the line of his collarbone through his shirt, a touch that felt like a claim and a question all at once. "Feel it yet?" "Starting to," Jace admitted, his voice low. Her closeness was a steady burn, her jade skin warm against him, and he fought the urge to pull her closer still. The Assembly's victory had shifted something in him. Years of running replaced by a tether he hadn't expected to want. Kalia snorted, her hand sliding down his arm, her calloused fingers grazing his bicep with a roughness that sparked heat. "Better get used to it, human. You're stuck with us, fights, feasts, and all." She leaned in, her breath hot against his ear as she added, "Hope you've got stamina." "More than you can handle," he shot back, meeting her amber glare with a smirk. She laughed, a deep, wild sound, and the contact lingered, her body brushing his side in a way that wasn't entirely accidental. Lisa tilted her head, her violet eyes glinting with mischief. "Oh, I think he'll manage," she purred, her fingers trailing from his jaw to his neck, light and teasing, sending a shiver through him. "I've peeked into that mind of yours, Jace. It's resilient and curious." Her touch lingered, a whisper of heat that promised more, and he felt that sigh-weave tug again, subtle, tempting. "Enough, you too," Zara said, though her tone held amusement. She stepped back, breaking the spell, but her hand slid down his chest to his waist before letting go, leaving a trail of warmth. "He needs rest. Tomorrow's when the real work starts." "Work?" Jace asked, raising a brow as the sisters moved toward the hall. "Ruling," Kalia said, slinging her blade over her shoulder. "Novacor's down, not out, and the Assembly's watching." "Sleeping's overrated anyway," Lisa added, tossing him a wink that hit like a dart. "Dream well, consort." They left him alone on the balcony, the night air cooling the flush on his skin. Zether materialized beside him, a shadowy figure leaning against the railing, its form flickering like smoke. Well, the sword said, its voice thick with glee. "Royal consort, huh? You've gone from gutter trash to king of the castle. How's it feel?" "Like a cage with better views," Jace replied, staring at the moons. "And louder company." "Louder and lovelier," Zether countered. "Don't play coy. I felt that pulse spike every time one of them got close." "You're smitten. Admit it." "Not smitten," Jace said, though the word felt flimsy. "Just figuring it out." "Figure faster," Zether said. "Because something's coming, I can smell it. Trouble doesn't sleep, even if you do." Morning broke with a harsh clang. Alarms shrieking through the palace, red lights pulsing like blood. Jace bolted upright, Zether already in his hand as he stumbled into the corridor. Zara met him there, her tunic swapped for armor, her hair pulled back tight. "Nova Corps remnant," she said, her voice clipped. "Small strike team, outer defenses. They're testing us." "Testing me, you mean?" Jace said, falling into step beside her. Kalia and Lisa joined them, armed and alert, their presence a wall of strength at his back. "Prove them wrong," Kalia said, her grin sharp as she hefted her blade. Her shoulder bumped his, a rough nudge that carried heat, and she lingered close as they moved. The outer courtyard was a war zone, smoke curling from breached walls, Zyran guards clashing with Novacore infiltrators in sleek exosuits. Jace charged in, Zephyr a dark streak, carving through armor with surgical precision. Zara fought beside him, her pistol flashing, her body brushing his in the melee, shoulder to shoulder, hip grazing hip, a rhythm that felt too natural. Kaliao roared past, her blade a whirlwind, and when she pivoted back, her hand gripped his arm to steady him, her touch firm and electric. Lisa hung back, her sigh-weaving dropping enemies mid-step, but her eyes stayed on Jace. "Beautiful chaos," she murmured, her voice threading through the fight, and when she brushed his mind, it wasn't fear she stirred. It was heat, sharp and distracting. The skirmish ended fast. Novacore's team reduced to smoking husks, the courtyard quiet save for the crackle of dying tech. Jace wiped Zephyr clean, breathing hard, and Zara stepped to his side. "They'll keep coming," she said, her hand resting on his lower back, fingers pressing through his coat. "You ready for that?" "Born for it," he replied, meeting her gaze. Her touch lingered, sliding up to his shoulder, and the air between them thickened. Kalia clapped his back, her hand heavy and warm. "Good, because I'm not dragging your corpse out of here." Her fingers squeezed, a rough tease, before she pulled away. Lisa sauntered over, her gown trailing the ground. "He's too pretty to die," she said, her hand brushing his chest as she passed, a fleeting spark that left him tense. "Keep him alive, sisters." "Stars help me," Jace muttered, but Zethyr's laughter rang in his head. Days bled into weeks, Zyra settling into a wary peace. Jace adapted, training with Kalia, plotting with Lisa, standing beside Zara in council chambers. The sisters wove him into their lives, their touches growing bolder. Zara's hand on his thigh during a meeting, Kalia's body pinning his in a sparring hold, Lisa's fingers tracing his neck as she whispered strategy. It was a slow burn, a dance of trust and temptation, and he felt himself sinking deeper. One night, Zara pulled him to the Nova Essence pool again. "Look again," she said, her voice soft, guiding his hand to the liquid. The vision shifted, Zyra thriving, but a shadow loomed, a figure with a metal eye and a fleet of ships. "Theron," she whispered, her body pressed to his side, her breath ragged. "Our brother. He's alive." "Brother?" Jace asked, the vision fading as he turned to her. "Exiled," she said, her hand gripping his arm, nails digging in with a heat that wasn't just fear. "He wanted the throne, Mother cast him out. Novacore must have found him." The revelation hit hard, but her closeness hit harder. She leaned in, her lips brushing his jaw, a tentative graze that ignited him. "We need you now, more than ever," she murmured, her body molding to his, jade skin warm through her tunic. He didn't pull away. His hand found her waist, pulling her closer, and when their lips met, it was fierce, years of restraint unraveling in a clash of heat and need. Her fingers tangled in his hair, her curves pressing tight, and for a moment, the galaxy shrank to just them. Kalia's voice broke it. "Stars, get a room." She stood in the doorway, grinning, but her eyes burned as she strode over, her hand landing on Jace's shoulder with a possessive squeeze. "Save some for us, Zara." Lisa slipped him behind, her laugh soft and dangerous. "Oh, there's plenty," she said, her fingers brushing Jace's neck, reigniting that psi spark. "Right, Jace?" He exhaled sharply, caught in their orbit. "You three are trouble." "The best kind," Zara said, pulling back with a smile that promised more. Peace shattered days later. Sensors screamed, a fleet breaching Zyra's orbit, Novacore insignias gleaming on their hulls. But something else, too, a flagship with a jagged, personal design. Theron. The palace braced for war, Jace at the sister's side, Zephyr humming with anticipation. "He's here for me," Zara said, her hand finding Jace's, her grip tight and warm. "For us." "Then he's dead," Kalia growled, her arm brushing Jace's as she drew her blade, her touch a spark of defiance. Lisa's eyes darkened, her fingers grazing his wrist. His mind a storm, rage, pain. He'll burn us all if we let him. Jace drew Zither, the blade pulsing. Let him try. The fleet descended, and Zyra's skies erupted in fire. Jace stood with the sisters, their presence a lifeline. Zara's steady resolve, Kalia's raw fury, Lisa's eerie calm. Theron's voice crackled through calms, cold and venomous. You took my world, human. I'll take yours. Bring it, Jace said, Zither singing as the first ships broke atmosphere. The fight was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would test every bond he'd forged. Zyra's skies burned as Theron's fleet tore through the atmosphere, their jagged hulls casting shadows over the capital. The palace trembled under the sonic booms, crystalline walls vibrating with each impact. Jace stood on the command platform, Zither gripped tight, its dark blade pulsing with a hunger that matched his own. Zara flanked him, her armor gleaming, her golden eyes fixed on the descending ships. Kalia paced like a caged beast, her energy blade crackling, while Lisa stood still, her violet gaze distant as she probed the enemy's minds. Numbers? Jace asked, his voice steady despite the chaos blooming outside. 50 ships, Zara replied, her hand brushing his arm as she leaned over a hollow display, her touch a fleeting anchor. Theron's flagship's the big one, center formation. He's not hiding. Good, Kalia growled, her shoulder bumping Jace's as she stopped beside him, her heat radiating through her armor. I want him to see me coming. Her hand landed on his back, a rough pat that slid down to his waist, lingering with a grin that promised violence, and maybe more. Lisa's voice cut through, soft but edged. He's furious, blinded by it. I can feel him, and something else. Novacore's tech, but twisted. Her fingers grazed Jace's wrist as she stepped closer, her touch sending a shiver up his spine, her sigh weave whispering heat into his mind. He's not alone up there. Figures, Jace said, shaking off the distraction. Zither, ready, the sword replied, its tone gleeful. Let's carve through them. Give these princesses a show they'll never forget. The platform's comms crackled, and Theron's voice slithered through, a rasp of rage and metal. Sisters, he spat, you thought exile would silence me? You gave my birthright to a human. I'll bury you all. Zara's jaw tightened, her hand finding Jace's, her grip fierce and warm. You lost your claim when you betrayed us, she said, her voice cold over the comms. Jace earned it. Earned? Theron laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I'll rip him apart and take it back. Try it, Jace said, his tone flat but deadly. He squeezed Zara's hand, a silent vow, and she pressed closer, her body a line of heat against his side. Kalia smirked, her hand sliding up his arm to his shoulder, fingers digging in with a spark of challenge. Let's make him eat those words. Lisa leaned in, her breath brushing his ear. He'll scream before the end, she murmured, her fingers trailing his neck, a sigh spark igniting his pulse. I'll see to it. The first wave hit, dropships breaching the courtyard, disgorging Novacore troops in heavy exosuits. Jace leapt from the platform, Zither a dark arc as he landed amid the enemy. The blade moved like a living thing, slicing through armor, absorbing energy blasts into its shadowed core. Zara followed, her pistol flashing, her shoulder brushing his in the fray, a rhythm of trust and fire. Kalia roared in, her blade a whirlwind, and when she spun back, her body crashed against his, her hands gripping his arms to steady them both, her grin wild and close. Keep up, consort, she shouted, her breath hot against his face, her touch lingering as she dove back in. Lisa wove through the chaos, her sigh-weaving dropping foes mid-step, their minds unraveling under her will. She caught Jace's eye, her smile sharp, and a wave of heat hit him. Not fear, but desire, sharp and unbidden. Focus, she purred, her voice threading through the din, her hand brushing his chest as she passed. The courtyard became a graveyard, bodies piling up, smoke curling from shattered tech. But Theron's flagship loomed closer, its cannons raining plasma on the palace's shields. Jace glanced at Zara, her face set with determination, and nodded. "We need to hit him directly." "Agreed," she said, holstering her pistol and grabbing a plasma rifle from Fallen Guard. Her hand brushed his waist as she moved, a fleeting spark that tightened his chest. "Ship's ready, let's go." The Zyran interceptor streaked toward Theron's flagship, Zara piloting with a precision that left Jace gripping the co-pilot's seat. Kalia and Lisa braced in the back, their presence a steady hum of energy. The ship shuddered as enemy fire grazed its hull, but Zara banked hard, threading through the barrage. "Hold tight," she snapped, her knee brushing Jace's as she adjusted the controls, her touch an anchor in the storm. "We're boarding." "Love a good crash landing," Kalia said, her hand landing on Jace's shoulder from behind, her grip firm and warm. "Don't die on me, human." "I'll try," he replied, meeting her amber glare with a smirk. Lisa leaned forward, her fingers trailing his arm, her psy-weave brushing his mind with a whisper of heat. "You'll live," she said, her voice a velvet promise. "I've seen it." The interceptor slammed into the flagship's hangar, metal screeching as it skidded to a halt. Jace kicked the hatch open, Zephyr flashing as he met the first wave of guards. The blade danced, heads rolling, armor splitting, while Zara fired beside him, her body pressed close in the tight space, her hip grazing his with every shot. Kalia charged past, her blade carving a path, and Lisa followed, her psi-weaving freezing enemies in their tracks. They fought through corridors of cold steel, Theron's presence a shadow ahead. The bridge loomed, a cavernous chamber dominated by a throne-like console where Theron stood, his teal skin glinting with cybernetic graphs, his right eye a glowing red orb. He turned, a sneer twisting his scarred face. "You," he hissed, pointing a clawed metal hand at Jace. "The thief." "Funny," Jace said, stepping forward, Zephyr humming in his grip. "I'm not the one hiding behind Novacore." Theron roared, drawing a massive energy glaive, its edge crackling with power. He lunged, and Jace met him, Zephyr clashing with the glaive in a shower of sparks. The sisters flanked, Zara firing, Kalia slashing, Lisa unraveling Theron's focus, but he was fast, augmented strength driving each blow. Jace ducked a swing, Zephyr absorbing a blast from Theron's eye, and countered with a strike that sheared off a chunk of his arm. "Left!" Zephyr shouted, and Jace pivoted, letting the sword guide him. The blade sang, slicing through Theron's leg servos, dropping him to his knees. Zara leapt in, her rifle but cracking his skull, while Kalia pinned his arm, her blade at his throat. Lisa stepped forward, her hand raised, and Theron's eyes widened as his mind buckled under her will. "Stop!" he gasped, his voice breaking. "Sisters, you stopped being family when you sold us out," Zara said, her tone ice. Her hand found Jace's, her grip tight and warm, grounding him as Theron slumped. Kalia pressed her blade harder, her shoulder brushing Jace's, her heat a steady pulse. "Finish it." "No," Lisa said, her fingers grazing Jace's arm, her touch a spark. "He's broken. Let him rot." Jace nodded, sheathing Zephyr. Theron's fleet faltered without him, Zyran forces mopping up the remnants. The flagship's bridge fell silent, victory heavy in the air. Back on Zyra, the palace stood scarred but unbowed. Theron was locked away, his fate undecided, but peace settled, for now. Jace stood in the grand hall, the sisters around him, their mother watching from her throne with frail pride. "You've proven yourself," she rasped, her voice faint but firm. "Zyra's consort." The crowd cheered, but Jace barely heard it. Zara stepped to his side, her hand sliding up his back, fingers pressing through his coat with a warmth that steadied him. "Told you," she murmured, her lips close to his ear. "You're ours." Kalia grinned, her arms slinging around his shoulders, her grip rough and possessive. "Damn right. Good fight, human." Her hand lingered, sliding down his arm, a spark of heat in her touch. Lisa pressed in, her fingers brushing his chest, her violet eyes glinting. "And more to come," she said, her sigh weave whispering promises into his mind. "We're just starting." Jace exhaled, caught in their orbit. Zara's quiet fire, Kalia's raw strength, Lisa's dangerous allure. "Guess I'm stuck," he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Stuck?" Zara echoed, her hand resting on his waist, her body close enough to feel her heat. "You chose this." "Maybe," he admitted, her touch igniting a flicker of something he hadn't named yet. Later, alone on the balcony, Zephyr leaned beside him in its shadowy form. "Hell of a day," the sword said. "Saved a planet. Won 3 hearts. What's next?" "Surviving them," Jace replied, staring at the moons. The sister's presence lingered, hands, breaths, glances, and he knew Zephyr was right. This was just the start. Far off, a Nova Core lab flickered to life. A scientist studied a shard of Nova essence, its glow pulsing with secrets. "The humans tied to it," she muttered, glancing at a screen showing Jace's face. "And it's waking up." The scientist's words faded into the hum of the Nova Core lab, the shard of Nova essence glowing brighter in her gloved hands. Its light pulsed like a heartbeat, casting eerie shadows across the sterile room. On the screen, Jace's face lingered. Frozen mid-battle, Zephyr raised, his gray eyes sharp with defiance. "Subject's resonance is off the charts," she murmured, tapping a datapad. "He's not just bonded to the Royals, he's linked to it." A second figure stepped from shadows, his silhouette obscured, but his voice was a low growl. "Then we take him, alive." On Zyra, the night stretched long and restless. The palace's grand hall had emptied, the celebration winding down to echoes of laughter and clinking glasses. Jace leaned against the balcony railing, the twin moons bathing the city in silver, their light softening the scars of battle. Zephyr rested silently against the wall, its shadowy form dormant for once, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Victory over Theron felt solid, real, but that shard of essence and Lisa's lingering sigh whispers gnawed at him. Something was coming, and he wasn't sure he was ready. Soft footsteps broke the silence. Zara appeared, her dress swapped for a loose tunic that clung to her curves in the moonlight, her crimson hair loose and wild. She stopped beside him, her shoulder brushing his, a quiet warmth that steadied his racing mind. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her voice low, her golden eyes catching his. "Too much noise up here," he replied, tapping his temple. Her hand slid up his arm, fingers tracing the muscle there with a slow, deliberate heat that made his breath catch. "You're not alone in that," she said, stepping closer until her body pressed lightly against his side, jade skin warm through the fabric. "Theron's gone, but I can still feel him, his rage, his betrayal. And you." Her fingers moved to his chest, resting over his heart, her touch a steady burn. "You're carrying it too. Comes with the job," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Her closeness was a pull he couldn't ignore, her scent, spice and steel, flooding his senses. He shifted, facing her fully, and her hand stayed, sliding up to his shoulder, nails grazing his neck. "Job?" she echoed, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "You're more than that now," Jace called her. She leaned in, her breath brushing his jaw, and when her lips grazed his, a soft, testing touch. It lit a spark he'd been fighting since the essence pool. His hand found her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened, fierce and hungry, her curves molding to him as her fingers tangled in his hair. The sound of boots interrupted them. Kalia strode onto the balcony, her bronze armor swapped for a tight shirt and pants, her golden hair a mess of curls. "Stars, you too," she said, her grin wide and unapologetic. "Thought I'd find you scheming, not steaming up the night." She stepped closer, her hand landing on Jace's back, sliding down to his hip with a rough squeeze that sent a jolt through him. "Room for one more?" Zara pulled back, laughing softly, her hand still on Jace's chest. "Always, Kalia. He's ours, isn't he?" Damn right, Kalia said, her arms slinging around Jace's shoulders, her body pressing close with a heat that matched Zara's. Fought like a beast today. Earn a little fun. Her fingers dug into his shoulder, a possessive tease, her amber eyes glinting with challenge. Lisa slipped in last, her violet gown shimmering as she leaned against the railing, her black hair cascading over one shoulder. Oh, he's earned more than that, she purred, her voice a velvet thread. She reached out, her fingers brushing Jace's jaw, trailing down to his neck with a light touch that reignited that psi spark. I felt your mind out there, steady, fierce. It's intoxicating. Her eyes locked with his, and a wave of heat curled through him, sharp and unbidden. Jace exhaled, caught in their orbit. Zara's quiet fire, Kalia's raw strength, Lisa's dangerous pull. You three don't quit, do you? He said, his voice low, a smirk tugging at his lips despite the tension coiling in his gut. Why would we? Zara murmured, her hand sliding down his chest to his waist, her body close enough to feel her heartbeat. You're stuck with us, Huyet Thong or not. Stuck's one word for it, Kalia added, her hand moving to his arm, fingers tracing the muscle there with a grin. I'd call it winning. Lisa leaned in, her breath brushing his ear. And we're just getting started, she whispered, her fingers grazing his collarbone, a spark that lingered as she pulled back with a knowing smile. The air thickened, their combined presence a storm he couldn't escape and didn't want to. But a distant rumble broke the moment, faint but growing, a tremor rippling through the palace. Zara's hand tightened on his waist, her body tensing. What was that? Kalia stepped to the railing, her grin fading. Not good. Lisa's eyes narrowed, her psi weave reaching out. Something's wrong, deep old. It's waking. The command center buzzed with activity as they stormed in, guards scrambling over hollow displays. A technician, a wiry Zyran with teal skin, pointed to a pulsing red dot on the map. Nova Essence Core, he said, his voice tight. Buried under the palace. It's active, spiking like never before. Theron, Jace asked, Zephyr humming faintly in its sheath. No, Lisa said, her hand brushing his arm as she joined them, her touch a spark of calm. This is bigger, older. I feel intent. Zara's golden eyes darkened. The essence, it's alive. Always has been. We thought it was just power, but it's tied to you, Kalia finished, her shoulder bumping Jace's, her heat grounding him. That vision, Theron's attack, it woke it. The floor shuddered again, stronger now, and a low hum rose from below, resonant, almost alive. Jace drew Zephyr, the blade pulsing in sync with the sound. What's it want? Us, Lisa said, her fingers trailing his wrist, her psi weave threading into his mind. You especially? It's curious. A hollow flickered to life, grainy footage from a Nova Core lab, intercepted by Zyran spies. The scientist held the essence shard, its glow syncing with the palace's hum. Subject Calder's resonance is key, she said. The core's waking, unlocking something. We need him. The feed cut out as the palace shook harder, dust raining from the ceiling. Zara grabbed Jace's hand, her grip fierce. We need to see it now. They descended into the palace's depths, a labyrinth of crystal tunnels glowing with eerie light. The Nova Essence Core loomed ahead, a massive orb of liquid silver, pulsing like a heart, tendrils of energy snaking through the air. Jace approached, Zephyr raised, and the orb flared, a voice echoing in his mind. Not Zethyr's, but deeper, ancient. You wield me, it said, resonant and vast, through blood and bond. What the hell are you? Jace demanded aloud, the sisters at his back. Power, it replied. Purpose. Yours to claim or lose. Zara's hand slid up his back, her touch steadying him. It's chosen you, she said, her voice trembling with awe. Like we did. Kalia's arm brushed his, her grip on her blade tight. Then claim it, damn it, before it claims us. Lisa pressed closer, her fingers grazing his neck, her psi weave mingling with the core's voice. It's alive, and it wants you whole. Jace reached out, his hand hovering over the orb. The sisters' touches anchored him. Zara's warmth, Kalia's strength, Lisa's spark. And when his fingers brushed the surface, the world dissolved. Energy surged, visions flashing, Zyra ascendant, galaxies bowing, a shadow, fleet rising. Then darkness, and he was back, the core dimming, its hum softening. What happened? Zara asked, her hand on his chest, her breath ragged. It's mine, Jace said, his voice steady but distant. And it's not done. Days later, Zyra stood stronger. Theron's defeat a rallying cry. The Essence Core a quiet ally. Jace walked the palace halls, the sisters at his side, their bond a living thing. Zara's hand found his, her touch a promise. Kalia's arm slung around him, her heat a challenge. Lisa's fingers brushed his jaw, her smile a tease. They were his Huyet thong or not, and he was theirs. But in the shadows, Nova Core stirred. The scientist smiled at the shard, its glow steady. He's activated it, she said to the shadowed figure. Phase 2 begins. On Zyra, Jace stared at the moons, Zether at his side. More coming, he asked. Always, the sword replied. You ready? With them. Jace glanced at the sisters, their presence a fire in his blood. Yeah,